Welcome back to the Ink Sink. I am Annie.
I'm Kaylee.
This is the publishing podcast for the rest of us, where we cover books and news and writing and reading, and we are so excited to bring you today our favorite news.
That's right. So here is an article by Teen Vogue, which is like, where censorship is an issue just in every aspect of our lives. And obviously everybody's concerned about like protecting the children. But when the children are the ones producing the content, then they're
like, no, not like that.
Yeah. and then you're going to suppress them. Like, where's your, like, you don't even have the thin veneer of your argument to, like, no, there's no legitimacy anymore. Anyway, so what we're talking about now is there is in Nebraska, Grand Island, which is a smallish city in the state of Nebraska, as I said, a local school, quote unquote, paused its student newspaper after they published an article. Their June edition was basically pride focused. Now, this was in response to a recent policy shift of students not being able to use any name that wasn't on their birth certificate. Which is just across the country, people are trying to suppress transgendered rights, which is terrible, and trans rights are human rights, etc. We 100% believe that.
Absolutely.
So that is just one of the many things that is happening in the country that we are all trying to fight. So in response to that, and obviously also just being Pride Month, they probably already had much of this content already planned. The newspaper published a full edition that was pride focused. Right. And then the school shut the paper down. Of course, the school themselves, said it's not because of this one incident or whatever. What do you mean? We know that there was some articles in there that were pride focused, but no, it wasn't that at all. And it was very obviously that. Like, let's all be clear. We know. We done been new.
In fairness, we are very biased, and Teen Vogue is very biased, and clearly the kids who went to Teen Vogue about it were very biased. But also, like, when you put the facts in order, it's hard to see a different story.
Yeah. Yeah, so the high school's Viking Saga newspaper, that was the name of it, which was a pretty cool name. Good for them.
Agreed.
The students attempted to publish their Pride edition after they were told by the school board that they could no longer use names not on their birth certificates, and said that they knew that the administration was trying to do, taking our names and pronouns away, so we wanted to make a stand while still following the rule. So they were attempting to act in good faith, which just goes to show that these people that are arguing that they're attempting to protect children are not. And they're just trash people. Sorry.
Right, because they're
hypocrites.
Then punishing these children.
At best, they're hypocrites.
I was heartened, obviously, to see that Teen Vogue had talked about this and it made national news. I haven't seen any updates come through. My hope is that they'll give them their newspaper back. Even if it's just the newspaper team, this is their form of passive resistance. And honestly, like, one of the main talking points lately has been how, violent resistance is not the answer. You need to have these passive, meaningful resistance movements. And this is what this was. These kids were like, we disagree with this policy. This is us fighting back. And they were punished for it. And now they are receiving the attention that they should have received. Absolutely. I don't know if this will change everything in that small town in Nebraska.
No, I mean, it is an interesting, like to put things into perspective for all of these, like, book bans that are focused on, quote unquote, protecting the children, and people that are, trying to protect the children with these pronoun bans and name bans and all that. Like, you're hurting your children. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't, like, this is expressing it, very clearly right now. So don't lie to yourself. Like, don't lie to me. I know what you're saying. Like, but at this point, right. I can only assume you're either actively lying to both of us, or you're just lying to yourself, because I sure as shit aren't buying it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're on the same page here. Anyway, support trans youth, support all queer youth.
Community outreach is your best bet.
Absolutely. If you can find a local organization that's supporting LGBTQ youth in your area, please support them, because it is so important. Moving on, I found this Reddit thread that I thought was absolutely fascinating, and if we talk long enough about it, I might make it its own main segment. We usually see the other end of this, and I'm going to intro it in a minute, but basically a lot of times we've probably even talked about this on the podcast. I don't know off the top of my head about how men are horrible about writing women and how they think that like we have prehensile breasts that move with our emotions or something, or they think that like we orgasm from our toes or something. It's like really strange
weird things.
It's so a lot of romance books are kind of famous for, you know, depicting women very strangely. There are entire like Twitter and TikTok and, you know, Tumblr accounts of just like excerpts of a man essentially describing a woman in a way that makes absolutely no sense. So we hear about this a lot, and it's always very funny because, you know, it's just like, have they never met a woman? Did they never ask a woman if this is how this works? And this thread came to us from Reddit on the r Ask Men sub. And the person asked, what is something women who write male characters often get wrong? And I had like a little mind blown moment because I'm like, of course women get things wrong about men all the time. I'm sure it's at least the same rate. What did you think of this when I sent it to you?
Oh, I actually was okay, so here's the thing. I mean, this comes up, I feel like, probably way too often. So let me just kind of give some perspective to my answer in that I think that the issue is very prevalent in the spaces that we're speaking of. It is a pendulum. So I think in published media, more traditionally published media, you see a lot more of the male authors. Mm-hmm. Whereas, especially in the creatively published media online, self-publishing, you see a lot more female authors. And that's where you're seeing, I think, and when I was reading through the thread, a lot of the comments were about original published fiction or fan fiction. Mm-hmm. And that's where they were like, well, this is where I see like a lot of female authors, you know, trying to romanticizing relationships or whatever, but it just happens to be like with a dude, whereas otherwise I've only ever seen like this sort of interaction between like two women or friends. That's
interesting. Yeah.
So I have actually seen this argument before, and it's just because I'm in that, you know, the space.
Sure. Yeah. So you have even more insight.
I've been in the creative fandom space for my, like, 3/4 of my adult life. My grandma got me into fan fiction, like, from the X-Files when I was, like, 12 or something. Sure, so, like, these arguments have come up multiple times, and it's very interesting to think about, like, in that context. Because I definitely knew that there were dudes that felt uncomfortable in fanish spaces because they felt either that they were misrepresented in writing. And I think that lately things have been picking up and people are more open to feedback. And it's going to be different in different fandom spaces because you've got a different age groups and you've got different perspectives. Like, for example, like the Star Wars space that I'm currently in right now, we're very open to taking in feedback internally, but also like it's about older dudes. Like that's the life, as opposed to like younger, you know, targeted audience and younger characters and stuff. So I feel like it really has gotten better, but not across the board everywhere, for sure. And there's still going to be people that just don't necessarily intend to be assholes, but don't know how to not be assholes.
Yeah, so, for sure.
Totally, absolutely there for the conversation. And I definitely found some very interesting pieces, like, as I was going through. Definitely reminded me, like, more specifically in here of some of the conversations that I had seen before and kind of gave me a little additional context for it. Really interesting.
Yeah, and we'll link this in the show notes. We're not going to read out a bunch of stuff about male social systems.
Yeah, it's definitely some funny pieces, some poignant pieces, some interesting things that I don't think would track for everybody, but absolutely do track for some people. So very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I do want to read one because
it
made me really happy. This person, whose username is Salami Tsunami, first of all, great username.
Absolutely.
Said, women underestimate the male ability to spend hours talking about the dumbest shit. Like, I want to read a romance book where the guy is late to the date with the girl, and she thinks he's cheating on her or something, but he was actually just hanging out with his bros, talking about how unreasonably strong gorillas are, and lost track of time.
And that is, let's just be clear, we actually probably have experienced that specific word-for-word scenario. Like, we've probably been out somewhere, and our people, like, our guys are, like, late.
Yeah. Because
specifically they were talking about this.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
I have no trouble believing that at 100%. Any level. They just didn't.
We've talked about own voices before and how important they are. And I think that this really underscores that, if nothing else. And also beta readers. Guys, and you can get eyes on your stuff, people. I understand that there's a lot of like, oh, I just want to put it out there, and if it's good, people will like it, and value of the work, and that's awesome. But also think about the fact that your audience is going to be significantly larger than just you, and you have blind spots. That's not a criticism. It's just a fact. Everybody has blind spots. You are experiencing life from inside of your head. Other people are experiencing life from inside of their own heads. They have totally different experiences. Get a beta reader. If one of your MCs is a different gender, a different ethnicity, a different culture than you, find someone from that gender, ethnicity, culture, and ask them to just take a look and ask for some feedback. I know that it's hard to ask people to read your work sometimes.
Especially when you're asking or opening yourself up for critique.
Absolutely.
It's still important to do so.
Agreed. And there are spaces, if you want to stay anonymous, there are spaces online where you can anonymously request beta reads and people will anonymously read it and give feedback that way. So I think it's really, really important.
Super agree.
Moving on to the news.
Tell me news about the news.
We've talked about this a little bit before in the podcast. I did not want to talk about social media on this podcast ever, but you convinced me that it was absolutely necessary.
It, unfortunately, like, for better or worse, Annie, it's a necessary evil. We have to.
Why did you tell us what's going on with Facebook in the news?
Oh, so we've already talked about this over the course of time, but, so in the world, laws have passed. We knew they were we already knew they were passing, and Meta, Facebook, knew this was coming even earlier than the rest of the country did, presumably. Because they already started rolling back their commitment to the news and the content of the news, and their news tab, etc. So the Meta has transitioned off of, or is transitioning off of, focus to news, which we had talked about previously. And now they are fully getting rid of, as of early 2023, all of the remaining human journalists that were employed to curate and review at least their top headlines, and replacing it fully with AI, which had already been the case for pretty much everything else. So there will no longer be any human interaction. So yeah, I mean, this is 100% a response to being forced to pay for content.
Oh, you think it's a response because they don't want to pay for the people to moderate the content?
Across the board. Every aspect of this. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So we, again, have talked about this, so brief run through of what's been happening so far. Basically...
Disclosures, these are our opinions, obviously.
Yeah, obviously. So Facebook had been kind of slowly deprioritizing some of its news.
As more countries got involved in saying you should pay for the things that you are consuming.
Yeah, it just kind of stopped, quietly stopped pushing the news tab and the news stories onto the main newsfeed, because Australia and a lot of other English-speaking countries were saying things like Facebook is essentially profiting off of the fact that they have our news on their site, so Facebook should be paying us. Facebook roundly rejected that. But also, because of its deprioritization, the quality of the news was going way down. The fact checkers were not being heard, not being utilized. And I believe that one was reported on by Axios. The article that we're citing today comes from Press Gazette, which is a UK news source. Normally... I feel like we get really meta on this.
I mean, again, it's news. It is. It's publishing news. It's news.
It's news about the news, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is almost even more meta, because it's news about people who are posting the news. So the situation has been kind of building, and now Meta has decided to take it one step further and get rid of the people on this news team. And this comes kind of amid a lot of other downsizing in other tech companies. But this is just kind of how it's affecting our interests, basically. And as Kaylee said, it's probably directly related to what's been going on in the news. So a bunch of smaller U.S. news sources, this also comes to us from Press Gazette, a bunch of smaller U.S. sources have also banded together to negotiate for bargaining power with Google and Facebook to, again, get money from the people who are profiting off of having their news on their site. And as Kaylee said, and this is our opinion, obviously there's not a lot of...
Nobody's come out twirling again their villainous mustache and said, haha, you tried to force me to pay for your work and now I'm not going to show anyone.
Yeah, so it seems like these things are related.
Guys, it seems pretty obvious.
Absolutely.
The minute any country was like, what if we forced you to pay for the content you're promoting? They're like, well... what if we didn't? And they're like, no, you got it. And they're like, oops, we're not going to do this anymore. I'm taking my ball and going home. Like, you can't just steal content from people. Anyway, the end.
I think that ultimately what we're going to see is, as I said, there's like a big reorg kind of happening about what content social media in general pushes out. And we're going to get into the Twitter drama in a little bit. But I feel like we're going to see a big shift about what content is going to show up on your feeds moving forward.
Yeah. I will say that this was something that I thought was a little interesting or kind of odd for the legislation that was passed, because we did the two different articles about the legislation itself and then the response, essentially, which, again, nobody directly said this is in response to that, but it's obviously, in our opinion, in response to being forced to pay.
They're quietly giving each other significant looks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That the larger news organizations would not have qualified, in America at least. It says that following recent amendments to the legislation, news organizations with 15,000 or more employees, in effect, the New York Times, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal, do not qualify. Which, I guess, they're thinking that they already have enough power to stand on their own, but it just seems like an odd choice that they would...
I don't think it's a coincidence that those news organizations also already have deals directly with Facebook.
Maybe they just were choosing not to. Yeah, I guess. It's just odd.
I think that, especially because it's a lot of moving parts and just effectively means that people just aren't getting as much quality news on their news feeds, which... some people would argue that that's probably a good thing, that we shouldn't be trying to get our news from social media anyway, but a lot of people only get their news from social media. I would rather them have high quality news.
There's a difference between getting your news on social media as, like, your Aunt Flo has said something or your neighbor Fred put something out there on their wall versus an actual, like, news article that was published and then
fact-checked, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, an actual, like in general, like a news report of some kind that is actually published and just available, like, through this channel. Those are different things, just to be clear.
And I'm with you, and I don't know how it's going to shake out, but we can move into the Twitter story. For those of you who aren't on Twitter or don't really care about social media, we're going to be kind of sticking to this for a while. Elon Musk, this is also from Press Gazette. Press Gazette's been just all over on this news.
On top of it, yeah.
Elon Musk bought Twitter for several $billion. And we've talked before about how journalists use Twitter a lot, and they use it more than they use any other platform, which effectively gives it a lot of power over the public consciousness, because journalists are the ones who are distilling public consciousness down to print, and a lot of times, I should say. And so they're also making contacts on Twitter, getting scoops on Twitter, looking at trends, talking to each other, talking to sources, because Twitter has secure messaging. So getting, a source in their DMs. And that's very important to those journalists because this is just the way that they've been using it for a really long time. So journalists have been really concerned about the Musk purchase of Twitter because he essentially came in and said, I want to promote free speech. I want to, stop all this content moderation. And the journalists are saying, like, we're getting death threats with the content moderation. We're getting death threats with the restrictions. How bad is it going to get if you get rid of those? So the Press Gazette kind of weighed in on what they were going to do. Musk also threatened to force organizations and journalists to pay to be verified, which is one way that journalists get, kind of prove who they are to their sources and to each other, which, would be a rounding error basically for the large organizations like the Washington Post and the New York Times, but for smaller independent journalists or smaller presses, that could be a big chunk of change to get everybody verified and all their different accounts verified. So it's been a lot of grumbling and saying, I don't know what's going to come next. And again, we don't know what's going to come next. I don't think that this specifically is going to do the same thing that the Facebook changes will, which is like, you know, getting rid of overall news on your newsfeed. But I think that a lot of the scoops and the notifications are going to dwindle on Twitter and starts changing.
Yeah, I mean, that'll
regulations.
definitely expose a lot of people up to greater, not identity fraud, but like catfishing. Like where there are already people today that get confused by fan accounts that are just even not intending to be a direct, like actually trying to make people think they're this person or an actor, a celebrity, a journalist, whatever, but they're already getting confused.
It's hard. It's hard to deal with it.
Sorry, I'm making you listen to this later. A lot of sighing here. Apologies.
A lot of people are talking about moving over to Tumblr, though, from Twitter. Maybe we'll get Tumblr back.
You know what? Tumblr's trying, so good. I will say this, if you are interested, I mean, Tumblr has not the best format for text, but it does support links. I'm not exactly sure about the secure messaging. I would need to go back and confirm that. But they have recently moved to just a straight, like, they're either ad supported or you can just buy like a year of them ad free for like, you know, $50 or $60. And like, otherwise they don't have the same sort of algorithms. They just can't as other social media content. So it would certainly be probably as far as it goes, the closest thing, I think, not necessarily a direct like relation to Twitter, but probably the closest social media to Twitter as far as it is that you have to search these things out and then you have to curate your own experience and form your own connections. And it's your dashboard. It's not something that other people are trying to feed you to make a buck.
I agree. There were a lot of grumblings on Twitter of people saying either Mastodon, which looks like a Discord sort of clone, or Tumblr. You know, it's just like, why not just Discord and Tumblr? Because those those are things where I'm already Discord's not really social media, but it's, you know, like the old chat rooms, which I think is where the internet really shines. Honestly, you were never going to join Twitter, so it doesn't really matter. But I'm
sorry. I just, like, I can only do so much. I haven't even been on Tumblr much lately. So, like, you know, it goes in cycles.
Yeah. So, for the free speech advocates out there, they think that, like, all of these fears are overblown, you know, and people should be allowed to
submit death threats?
To submit death threats. That's what they think. And I feel like, you know, even 4chan and 8chan, which have been absolutely inundated with the free speech people, have also adopted content moderation because at a certain point it's not sustainable and it's harmful. So I don't know. I can't imagine that Twitter has a future that way when even things like 8chan, I can't imagine that Twitter would go very far with it either. But I don't know. Moving on to ads. I don't like talking about marketing just because I find marketing to be weird and manipulative, but ads are extremely important to the publishing industry. If you are a regular listener of podcasts, you know most podcasts are ad supported. Ours is not. Others are, and they want to make a living, and that's totally their right and privilege, but also, many newspapers, many magazines, even comic books are propped up by ads and ad sales. So we do have to talk about that when we talk about publishing.
And we've talked about this a little bit previously about ad blocks and what was the particular service that allows you to elect certain content to come through your ad block. I can't remember what that
I don't remember
was
either.
Called. We'll look it up. We'll include it in the links to this.
Okay.
But are you talking about the Press Gazette article right now? Was that your intro to that?
Sorry, I was in the middle of a drink.
No worries, you're good. So, what Annie wanted to, or was introducing here was is a Press Gazette article that was published very early in October, related to, just publishers that are currently being pressured by advertisers, related to their content because ad block lists are hurting the bottom line. And then it's just a review of, I'm trying not to just come out and just be like, well, they're scummy assholes, because they're not, but also a little bit that they are. it's just like nobody's surprised that advertisers are averse to real content, in my opinion, or they shouldn't be, because it means that somebody's going to get offended. And that means somebody's not going to buy their thing. Well, yes, if you advertise on a news site, go figure, people are going there for news, whether they're there to agree with the news or they're there to be offended by the news. Like, it is going to be one of those two things, or a combination, perhaps even. So they'll be very confused in their response and how they feel about your advertisement content. So, Annie, what did you think about this?
Well, I mean, I can see where they're coming from. You know, nobody wants to talk about war atrocities. Like, there's no one who's, like, getting pleasure. Well, no one is getting pleasure out of this. This is not something that anyone is happy about. But it is really, really important for the news to cover it. And the advertisers don't want to be on a page with a picture of war atrocities. And I can see both sides to this. But also, like, if this is the only way that news is getting funded, you have an ethical obligation to support the news. I'm sorry. Like, that's my opinion. But I agreed with Kaylee. Like, they're going there for the news. They're going to feel how they're going to feel about the news, and they're going to feel how they feel about the advertisers. It's
most
not something
people
you can control.
Separate that in their head. I feel like.
So what the advertisers are saying is they're going to the news orgs and saying, stop publishing this kind of stuff, which is frankly ridiculous.
Not going to happen.
Yeah, nor should it.
It shouldn't happen.
Absolutely not. So these news CEOs talked at a conference about this issue, and these were news organizations in the UK, but this is also happening in the US as well. And another article that came on close on the heels of this was a Wired story talking about how marketing is so broken right now, just because of the way that these clicks are sold. So the way that marketing essentially works right now is that people are selling numbers of clicks. So you go to the New York Times and you say, hey, I want to put my ad on your site. The New York Times says, okay, we can guarantee X number of clicks. You will pay us for those numbers of clicks. And so they do. There are services out there that are saying, you know, oh, okay, well, I can just write a program that clicks. Will I also get paid for the clicks? Yes, it turns out. And then they do. So there's just like these bots going around selling themselves essentially to get clicks or to provide clicks. And then the advertisers are getting mad, and it's like, you got what you paid for. You got clicks. Like, what did you want from us? Clicks? Because that's what you got. So it's all like what's that thing where it just like keeps spiraling down into a infinity?
A death spiral?
No. It's like a visual, like a puzzle, and it just keeps spiraling down to infinity.
Oh no, I don't know.
It's like one of those like a mirror thing, and it just go anyway.
An Escher.
I guess, yeah, it's like an Escher thing where it's just like they're paying for the clicks, but the clicks are paying for the ads, and then the ads are not real, and then the bots aren't real, and then the clicks aren't real, and it's like
none of the points
real.
matter.
Yeah, right. And you're just like, awesome. So this doesn't work. This is ridiculous. And I find that I felt was very much related, because that's also a thing that the advertisers are mad about. But it's like, how do you expect anyone to be able to contend with that?
Yeah, I mean, present a better option, I guess. Like, if you're mad about the way that it's set up now, then how do you want it set up?
Yeah. So advertisers are just mad in general, basically, is the answer here.
It was interesting. It was like, yeah, they're like on the panels, like, we support the news, but also we don't want our content on the news. Like, well, then we won't publish news. They're like, no, we want the news. No, you don't. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah,
I don't know what the solution is. Like, I think that they're absolutely right. Like, if I am reading an article about, you know, war atrocities, I also don't want to see an ad for Verizon. That's realistic.
Fair.
But in that case, like, you're talking about different tiers of news, and then
how do you break it down?
Yeah, that tier of news also needs to get paid for. It also needs to be supported. And again, the dirty little secret of publishing right now is that a lot of it is ad supported. So what do we do?
And I do appreciate that Reach Chief Revenue Officer Piers North.
Mm-hmm.
He said that
Reach is a UK publisher.
Yeah, sorry. Reach is one of the publishers. That was contributing to this particular like panel, said that it was up to the news brands and marketers to find the answer.
Yeah.
He said in his quote, he said that we can't expect someone to rescue us. We've got to figure it out. So I think that's at least helpful that they are acknowledging that it is something that they have to come together to solve.
Right.
Whether or not that answer is, and that collaboration and cooperation is starting now, or if it's going to come in the future. Who knows? Best guess.
Moving on to one of our favorite sections, marginalized people killing it in publishing.
Yeah.
Congratulations to Kwame Mbalia, who will be heading a new imprint at Disney focusing on Black joy and Black entertainment stories. This is a huge hole in the children's book market, and I am super excited to see that this is getting the recognition that it deserves. This is something we talked about before, like so many narratives about people of color is about suffering and stuff, and we don't want that for kids. Mm-hmm. We don't want that to be like the future that they see for themselves exclusively. Like suffering and pain exist, but also joy exists
for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like you can't separate like your happiness from your tragedies. Like nobody's only suffering all the time.
Absolutely. So this is a new imprint called Freedom Fire from Kwame Mbalia. He was the best-selling author of the Tristan Strong trilogy, and it is moving over to the Disney Hyperion Company. So congratulations to that whole imprint. Imprints don't exist just on one person. It's a whole team. So congratulations to all of you all. Keep on sparkling.
Thank you so much for what you're bringing to kids. Everybody should have a chance to see themselves happy and successful.
Yes. Kaylee, do you have a Kaylee Coda for us for this episode?
Oh, man. Critical thought, guys. Like, it's helpful. It really is. Like, we talked about this a little bit, and it's come back a few times, like, with the people that are, like, putting on their, glasses and big noses and mustaches and being like, we're not being villains. This just happened to come at the same time as the thing, like, for the school newspaper and for Meta and for this, the legislation, like, all of that. Like, come on, let's be critical. Don't necessarily be cynical, but be critical. You can be both. I'm just saying, like, at the very least, like, put some thought into what you're doing. But also, like, this also applies to, like, our quote-unquote liberal, like, youth and our liberal, like, non-youth, I guess, because I don't know what that maths out to anymore as far as age range. But, like, don't steal from your friends. Don't steal from your people that are online with you and that are trying to create content. Like, you know when what you're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's probably all I got.
Thanks for listening to The Ink Sync. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts. We are on all major platforms. We are also available on Anchor and Spotify with sponsorships. You can sponsor us for as low as 99 cents a month if you want. But we highly, highly encourage you to go check out our bookshop page. That link will be in the show notes. And you can find us on Twitter, on Instagram. And thank you, Abby.
Thank you, Abby.
We'll see you next